There's an old truth that rarely announces itself in loud homes or quiet ones, but it lives in both. A child does not need chaos to become afraid. Sometimes all it takes is a room that never fully settles. That is the strange thing about constant tension. From the outside, it may not even look dramatic. There may be no broken plates, no visible disaster, no obvious cruelty that can be pointed to and named without hesitation. Sometimes there's only a house where the air always feels slightly wrong, a conversation that is never fully relaxed, a parent whose mood hangs over the room like weather, a silence that feels heavier than sound, a peace that is not peace at all, only a temporary pause before something invisible shifts again. And a child living inside that kind of atmosphere learns something very early. Safety is not a place, it is a calculation. That is where the deeper story begins. Because people who grow up around constant tension do not simply remember stressful moments. They are shaped by rhythm, by repetition, by the slow training of a nervous system that learns to live half a second ahead of the present. The body begins listening for footsteps before it listens for itself. The face begins scanning for changes in expression before it learns the language of its own needs. The heart begins preparing for rupture even in ordinary moments because ordinary moments never stayed ordinary for long. This is why some people grow into adults who look calm but are never truly resting. Adults who laugh easily but cannot fully soften. Adults who seem mature, perceptive, helpful, and emotionally aware, yet carry inside them a private storm they can rarely explain. Their sensitivity did not come from nowhere. Their caution did not appear by accident. Their exhaustion is not random. It often began in rooms where tension was the true parent, not always screaming, sometimes sighing, not always fighting, sometimes cold politeness, not always threats, sometimes unpredictability. A child does not need a clear explanation to feel that something is wrong. Children are readers of atmosphere before they are interpreters of language. They know when the room tightens. They know when laughter is forced. They know when a pause contains danger. They know when affection is available and when it has suddenly become expensive. They may not understand the adult reasons behind the tension, but they understand its effect. They feel it in the body long before the mind could ever turn it into words. And so they adapt. That adaptation can look surprisingly beautiful from the outside. The child becomes observant, helpful, quiet, mature for their age, easy to have around, sensitive to other people's moods, quick to apologize, good at preventing problems before they grow, good at making things easier, good at shrinking in just the right moments, good at becoming useful in rooms where usefulness feels safer than honesty. People often praise children like this. They call them wise. They call them thoughtful. They call them old souls. They call them resilient. But there's often a hidden grief beneath that praise, because what looks like maturity can sometimes be hypervigilance with good manners. What looks like emotional intelligence can sometimes be a nervous system that never received permission to stop scanning. What looks like strength can sometimes be a child who learned that softness was only safe when no one else in the room was unraveling. That is one of the quiet tragedies of growing up around constant tension. The adaptation is often mistaken for personality. And once survival begins to look like personality, it becomes very hard to question. Maybe you have seen this in yourself. Maybe you have felt it in small, everyday moments that seem too minor to explain to anyone else. The way your chest tightens when someone's tone changes slightly. The way a delayed reply can disturb you more than you want to admit. The way another person's silence can make your mind start searching for what went wrong. The way you prepare explanations before anyone asks for them. The way you feel most tired not after obvious conflict, but after subtle emotional shifts that no one else even noticed. Why does that happen? Because the body keeps excellent records. A person who grew up around constant tension may no longer live in that house, may no longer speak to those people, may no longer even think about those years very often. But the body remembers what it meant to live in anticipation. It remembers dinner tables where no one shouted but everyone was braced. It remembers doors opening and the instant recalibration that followed. It remembers love that could be warm in one moment and unreachable in the next. It remembers the cost of reading something wrong. It remembers the relief of disappearing before becoming a burden. And when the body has learned those lessons deeply enough, it does not wait for real danger. It reacts to resemblance. A certain tone, a certain pause, a certain silence, a certain expression, a room that suddenly feels emotionally colder. Resemblance is enough. That is why many people who grew up around constant tension struggle to understand the intensity of their own reactions. The present moment may be small, but the body is not responding only to the present. It is responding to an archive, to old rooms layered beneath new ones, to earlier climates hidden beneath ordinary weather, to years of unnamed vigilance that taught the nervous system one central rule: do not relax too early. And this rule can enter every corner of adult life. It enters friendships first, often quietly. You become the one who notices when everyone else is off, the one who can sense discomfort before it becomes visible, the one who smooths awkwardness, fills pauses, explains other people's behavior, diffuses conflict before it spreads. You may seem easy to be around because you are always managing currents no one else notices. But that ease costs energy. It costs attention. It costs the part of you that might otherwise have simply existed without monitoring the room. Then it enters love. And love becomes complicated in a very specific way. Not because you do not want closeness, often the opposite. People who grew up around tension may hunger deeply for peace, for reliability, for the feeling of being with someone whose presence does not tighten the body. But that hunger often lives beside another force: caution. So when someone you care about becomes quieter than usual, your mind does not simply observe, it mobilizes. When their tone shifts, you do not always hear only what was said. You hear possibility. Maybe they are upset. Maybe something is wrong. Maybe this is how distance begins. Maybe this is how love cools. Maybe you need to make the moment softer before it hardens into something worse. And little by little, you may begin living in relationships as if you are not only in them, but managing the emotional atmosphere of them. Not always consciously, not always dramatically, often in very subtle ways. You explain more than necessary. You reassure quickly. You apologize early. You stay alert to mood. You become careful with your own feelings if they seem likely to add pressure to the room. You work to keep things stable, even when stability is not fully yours to create. This is where another sorrow begins to grow, because when a person has lived too long around tension, they may start confusing calm with something that must be earned rather than something that can be shared. They may feel overly responsible for emotional weather that was never theirs to control. They may believe, without meaning to believe it, that closeness is preserved by constant attunement, carefulness, usefulness, and the prevention of discomfort. But discomfort is part of being human. That truth sounds simple, yet to someone shaped by chronic tension, it can feel almost revolutionary. Because in tense homes, discomfort often did not behave like ordinary discomfort. It expanded. It contaminated the room. It altered the atmosphere for hours. It became everyone's problem, whether anyone spoke about it or not. So the child learned to fear not only conflict itself, but the possibility of conflict, the shadow of it, the scent of it before it arrived. This is how some adults become exhausted by things that seem small to others, not because they are dramatic, because their body has spent years being trained that little shifts are rarely little. A silence was never just silence. It was a question mark, a warning, a forecast, a possible beginning. And forecast is exhausting. To live forecast first is to never be fully in the present. It is to keep one ear turned toward what might go wrong, one eye on the emotional horizon, one part of yourself withheld from rest because rest once came with risk. After enough years, this kind of vigilance becomes so normal that peace itself can start feeling unfamiliar, even suspicious. That is another wound people rarely talk about. Some people who grew up around constant tension do not know what to do with true calm when it arrives. They want it. They crave it. They dream of it. But when it is finally present, something in them may still remain alert, waiting, listening for the turn, not because they enjoy stress, because tension shaped their sense of reality so deeply that ease can feel less believable than strain. So even in good relationships, stable jobs, quiet homes, gentle friendships, the body may continue behaving as though the walls could shift at any time. And when the shift never comes, the person may not feel relief right away. They may feel confusion, emptiness, restlessness, a strange inability to trust the softness in front of them. This can create shame. Why can't you just enjoy peace? Why do you still brace when no one is hurting you? Why does your body keep acting as if something is wrong? Why do you feel guilty when no one has accused you? Why do you over-explain, over-prepare, over-read? These questions can become cruel when they are asked without compassion, because the nervous system is not effective for continuing a strategy that once kept it safe. It is loyal, that is all. Loyal to environments that are gone, but not gone enough for the body to forget. And perhaps this is why people who grew up around constant tension often carry such complicated feelings about themselves. They may secretly admire their own sensitivity while also resenting it. They may rely on their perceptiveness and feel trapped by it at the same time. They may know exactly how to read everyone else while feeling strangely estranged from themselves. This estrangement matters, because when so much energy goes into reading the room, there is often very little left for reading the self. You become fluent in tone before need, fluent in other people's discomfort before your own hunger, fluent in atmosphere before desire. And over time, this creates a specific kind of loneliness. The loneliness of being deeply in contact with everyone else while losing contact with yourself. You may know what everyone around you is feeling. You may know who needs space, who needs comfort, who is disappointed, who is hiding something. But when someone asks what you need, the answer may feel strangely far away. Not because you do not have needs, because you were trained not to center them. This is where tension begins turning inward. It becomes headaches after ordinary conversations. It becomes exhaustion that sleep cannot fully fix. It becomes a stomach that tightens before small confrontations. It becomes the inability to fully enjoy good moments because part of you is still watching for how they might end. It becomes guilt when you rest, discomfort when you receive, confusion when someone is tender without asking anything from you in return. And perhaps most painfully, it can become identity. You may come to believe you are just a sensitive person, just an anxious person, just someone who thinks too much, just someone who likes peace, just someone who is a little intense under the surface. All of those may be partly true, but they may also hide a much older truth that your inner life was shaped by years of adjusting to conditions no child was meant to normalize. Not every wound comes from something spectacular. Some wounds come from atmosphere, from the drip of tension, from the erosion of never fully settling, from growing up in a place where your nervous system had to become the weather report. And erosion is easy to miss because it happens slowly. No single moment may seem enough. No single incident may feel dramatic enough to justify the depth of the response now. This is why so many people minimize their own experience. They say things like, nothing that bad happened, or it was not abusive, or other people had it worse. Perhaps those things are true in one sense, but the body is not measuring pain against someone else's biography. It is measuring repetition, duration, atmosphere, the chronic strain of having to live in alertness for too long. A tree does not need one violent blow to grow bent. Constant wind is enough, and the psyche is no different.